I'm joined by Mr. Neil Davies. Hello, Neil.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm okay, thanks. Yeah, good.
Cool. Right, so we have come together today to talk about Home for Good, which is a charity that you work or volunteer for. But we were just talking about the gathering for men, Christian Fellowship for Men. So I thought let's just go to there because that's how we actually met each other at that festival. Just give me your overview of the gathering from your perspective.
Yeah, it's quite a unique space in many ways. All of these men gathered together, and it seems to cater for everyone. From whether you want to hit 10 bells out of a punch bag, you want to do some wrestling, or you want to have a quiet cup of coffee. It seemed to cater for everyone, and all of these men gathered together. It was just an incredible space, and for us at Home for Good. It was particularly good this year because our CEO, Tarn Bright, was there. She was on the stage and she'd done on the main stage, and she also done a seminar. And we had just had lots of interest from men, some of who had considered fostering an adoption before. Others, well, I never thought of this before, but tell me some more. So for us, it was just a really profitable time, and we just enjoyed it.
It was brilliant fun, and I loved such a wide range of men in such a close proximity. But I mean, again, on the Sunday, this is what threw me. I saw photos of the field because I was there quite late, and then I saw photos, and it was immaculate. There's this
Wow,
gathering of nearly 2,000 guys, and the field was pristine.
that's incredible.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Home for Good. Let's just deal with one of the words, just in case we've got people around the world listening. What is fostering in the context of what you're talking about?
Okay, so fostering is so a child maybe for various reasons can't live with their birth parents. So they will come into the care system, and people will foster. And fostering is basically that you take the child into your home and look after them. There are a number of different types of fostering. Um, there is short-term fostering, which is anything up to 2 years, and then there's long-term fostering, which is anything beyond. And then there's other things like respite, where you may want to give a foster carer may need a break for a little while, so you look after the child, but you will be assessed by the local authority or by an agency, and approved at a panel. So it's a rigorous um, assessment process that people go through.
Is this the same as adoption? I'm just trying to sort of deal with some of the glossary, I guess, some of
Yeah.
these terms which might be interchangeable depending on the country in. So is fostering the same as adoption?
Um, Same in the sense of a child sadly couldn't live with their parents anymore, so they come into the care system. But adoption is that basically you legally become that child's parent. So again, it's an assessment process that you would go through. But with fostering, let me just clarify this bit. With fostering, you wouldn't have, or generally wouldn't have, any parental responsibility. That would be shared between the biological parents and the local authority. Whereas with adoption, the child becomes yours legally, and they become legally part of your family. So you have parental responsibility then.
Thank you. I just thought it was worth because I know people listen from different parts of the country and the world. Adoption, fostering. Sometimes I hear it, and it's well, is it the same? Is it the same word? It's often used similarly, but they are very different, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah, they are. Yeah, very different. And yet you could say, for somebody, so often, sometimes we will have support groups, and sometimes the support group could be a fostering one, or it could be an adoption one. And sometimes, if you were to have separate groups, sometimes you might put, I've heard it said anyway, that you could put long-term fostering in with adoption, because there's a sense in which you're in for the long term, but you still haven't got that parental responsibility even at long-term fostering. So I think it's great to clarify the terms. Yeah.
I thought it would be helpful just because even I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure I know what they are, but let's just speak to somebody who knows far more than me. So Home for Good, just give us a little bit about that then. So it's dealing with clearly fostering. So what is the not the point? That sounds terrible. What's the purpose? What's the point? What is it you actually do as a charity?
Yeah, so we hold a sort of it seems like a unique, quite a unique space in many ways. So we are in the middle, so to speak. You have the local authority on one side who has responsibility for every child coming into care, and on the other extreme we have the church, and we are wanting to go to the church and saying, do you know about all of the children who are in the care system here? Could you do something about it? Could you open your door? Could you become a foster carer? Could you become an adopter? So at a basic level, we're wanting to make the church more aware of the needs out there. And the needs are great. And the other thing that we want to do as well, there are a number of things that we do, but one of the other things is we want to support the local church as well, because sometimes when a child comes into care, they will all have suffered trauma and loss, and sometimes that can be played out in difficult behaviors, which people quite often don't understand and saying that's just a naughty child, whereas actually you're saying, well, no, that's not a naughty child. If you knew what this child had been through. So we want to help churches to understand what that is and how to help that family navigate and how to help the church to navigate that route, because we believe that the church is the answer to the great crisis that we have in our country with children in the care system.
So I suppose in a sense you're kind of a bridge sort of slash information that this is existing over here. You need to know about it. And by the way, can we help you to realize this is something you can do?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And you know, and one of the other things, I think one of the other things that is important to mention, we have what we call a I've just been on 2 weeks annual leave, and all the terms have left me.
Don't
We
worry, it's fine.
we
No,
have
no one will notice. It's okay.
we have a particular department which will help people with any queries that they have. So, for instance, if I went along to a church and spoke about this, somebody comes up to me at the end and says, "I'd like to consider this. I've never thought about it before, but I'd like to consider it." Then we have this department of people which is made up of some social workers, foster carers, adopters, who will go on a journey with that person, no matter how small the inquiry. If this has just occurred to me, or if you're further down the line, we will help with all aspects, even support for people who have adopted and fostered for many years and find that they need a bit of support. We will be there, and we will help them to support them. And if the issue goes beyond us, we can signpost people. So we want to help in that really practical way as well.
I got some friends who have now got two adopted sons, and it's amazing to see how that family, which is not biologically connected because they've obviously adopted their children, they are such a beautiful family. And the love that I've seen, I've been to see them of the mum and the dad of these two kids is amazing. What they can bring, and I guess that's the joyful bit that you want to show people you can do this too.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And there is going to be there is a sense in which maybe this is not for everybody. But it is certainly a message which God seems to have put in his word, that we look after the most vulnerable within society. We offer hospitality, which is more than just a cup of tea and a meal, which is all good. And not, but hospitality seems to be opening up your home as well. And so yeah, it is. And we've fostered and adopted as well. And and so I can understand what you're saying about your friends. It is um, is not always easy, but then lots of family life is not always easy. But if I was to look at the net effect of it, um, the overall thing is we're so glad we done this, and if we had our choice around again, we would do it all again. Hard bits as well, and I think one of the other things is that it's not just us giving these children a home. It's what they do to us then, which helps, which is incredibly beautiful. They enrich our lives with all of the natural flows of general life, and that they've enriched our lives an incredible amount. And for our two, we have two birth children as well, and they were 8 and 6 when ours first came to live with us, and they have it's enriched their lives as well with the joys and the challenges and all the rest of it. So yeah, there's an enrichment on both sides, from us having them and them having us. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
And we can't do everything, but we can do something, and maybe fostering is something that you can do, because it could be you have the opportunity. So let's just work out some of this. If somebody comes to you and says, "Well, I think fostering might be something that we would like to do," what is it you're first looking at to see if this is actually a possibility beyond we want to have a go at this and information? I mean, what actually sets somebody out to be able to be a fosterer?
Yeah, let me just say, just before we go any further, that Home for Good isn't an agency, so we can just give advice and we can inspire and that, but all assessments are carried out through the local authority or through a fostering or adoption agency. So, what was your question again?
I'm just wondering, what is it if somebody came to you and said, "Well, I think this might be something I want to do." What are the kind of things that need to be in place, I guess, for that to be a possibility?
Yeah, so one of the big things, probably one of the first questions a local authority will ask is, have you got a spare room? If you haven't got a spare room, then there's a sense in which you haven't hit the start line yet. You need a spare room so that child can come can have their um, own space. I guess another part of it, in talking to a social worker recently, she talked a lot about flexibility. Can you be flexible with things? That it may be that bringing up a child who is fostered or adopted, having them in their home, the way that you parent them may look different to how you would parent your birth children, because they've been through some trauma, some loss. So there's this whole thing of therapeutic parenting, which is hugely helpful. Um, and ultimately, I guess, so if you've got the spare room, if you're flexible, I guess those are some of the biggest things, and then the local authority or the agency, whoever's doing the assessment, they will sort of take things from there. And if other things crop up, they like you to be honest within the assessment as well. And the assessment is quite rigorous. They will ask a lot of questions, and rightly so, because you're having little human beings in your home. So we want to know, they want to know, this is a safe place. This is a good place. Yeah, not a perfect place, but a good place.
Yeah, no, there's no perfect families' homes. That doesn't exist. But a family that's willing to be flexible and to love, we should all be able to do that, should we not?
I think so. Yeah.
We should be able to.
Yeah.
Let's just go back a little bit in time. Then we can come back to Home for Good. But what's your story of faith? You're talking about God and church and Christianity. So, how has that become important to you?
Yeah. So my story of faith, I grew up in a family which wasn't a Christian family, as I understand being a Christian. Um, So we would go off to Sunday school, and I would ask lots of questions. I'm a very inquisitive person. I just got to know, I got to understand, and to a point where the vicar said to my grandmother one day, "Neil asks an awful lot of questions." Well, these are big issues, isn't they? I want to know why I'm here. So, but anyway, going through life then. I went traveling to Australia. I backpacked around Australia and New Zealand and for a year. And during that time, there were four people. When I got to Sydney, there were four people at different times during that. Yeah, I was there for 9 months. At four different times during that time, some people would stop me in the street, and I knew what they were going to talk about. I didn't know what they were going to say exactly, but I knew they were going to talk about Jesus. And I would always stop and talk, and then they'd invite me along to a Bible study, and I'd say, no, thanks,
Mm.
not for me. But one of them got me a Bible, and I started to read it. And I used to read it on the bus on the way home from work. I'd buy a newspaper so that I could disguise the fact that I was actually reading the Bible, you know. Um, but it started to speak to me. And a few years previous, I had read through the whole Bible in about 2 years. It hadn't really said a lot to me. This time, the words seemed to be jumping off the page, you know, and thinking, boy, this seems to represent reality all around me. It seems to be what life is about. And then I then came back. My cousin's a Christian, and I just wanted to come back home then and speak to him and all of that. And then at some point during 1995, and I can't pin a date on it, I just started to follow Jesus and got baptized in November. Um, yeah, and that was it really.
So 1985 was the beginning of a journey walking alongside Jesus Christ with him in your life. We're now in 2024, so we come forward 40 years. But how has that faith impacted the work you're doing? Because you're working with Home for Good. You're helping other people in some context. I mean, you were at the gathering, advising the men there. This is what fostering is about, and is it for you? How has that faith now impacted, and how did your faith help you arrive with Home for Good?
Yeah, good question. Because when we started to foster, or when my wife first mentioned it, I just thought there was a sense in which I thought, yeah, all right, but have you lost the plot? You know, life is difficult enough as it is. But she mentioned it, and I just said, yeah, I'll support you in it, and whatever. And so we went through the whole assessment, and there were there was one of the phrases that I would use to my wife was when the two children came to live with us. They came at 3 weeks old and almost a year old. And one of the things I'd say to my wife, probably when things started to get a bit difficult, was, "This is your project, and I'm supporting you in this project."
Right behind you.
And and there came a point where she said, in the end, "Will you please stop saying that? You are in it, you know." But the little girl who was the three week old girl that we fostered, um, she wasn't very well, and my wife was back and forth to the hospital an awful lot. And there came this one particular day. It was Thursday, September the 30th, 2010. I remember the date, and you'll understand why now in a second. She said she needs to go to the hospital again. I'm just exhausted and not well. You're going to have to take her. So I took her up, and then we moved into the Friday then, and she was still in on the Friday. And I was saying to the doctors and nurses, do you think she's going to be out by today or tomorrow morning at the very earliest? Now, the reason I was asking that, because it was October the 1st, 2010, and for any golf fans out there, they'll know what that meant. It was Ryder Cup at the Celtic Manor in Newport. And my brother had tickets for all 3 days, but he said, I can't make the Saturday. Do you want the ticket? Yes, please. So he gave me the tickets. Anyway, Saturday morning arrives, 9 o'clock, 10, 11, 1 o'clock. I know I am not going to the Ryder Cup. It's once in a lifetime on my doorstep thing. And it was at around about that time where it wasn't an audible voice, but there was a clear thought. And the thought was, this little girl here is far more important than a bunch of grown men with sticks hitting a little ball around the field trying to get it in a hole. That seemed to start to change everything for me. And then another thought that came very closely after was, as I began to understand that some children who were in the care system couldn't, were, if their parents, or who had prior to them being in the care system, if their parents had called them home from, or they had to go home, they wouldn't want to go home because what's awaiting them, is there violence? Is there's lots of reasons why children may not want to have gone home. And yet, I know when I had to go home, my father called me from the park, no problem. I just went home. It was a good, loving household. And I just thought to myself, on the back of that thought, where God had, I believe God had said, this little girl is more important than these guys playing golf. I just thought every child should have, at the very least, the upbringing that I had. And that was it. I was in. And then I heard of Home for Good. I started to read the book. I read the book through. I then heard of what was then called Adoption Sunday. I talked to my pastor, can we have Adoption Sunday? Yes, no problem. Pastor happened to be my brother-in-law, and they had adopted 2 years previously. So he preached a very powerful message. And for the next few years, we would do that. But I had then knocked together a sermon on adoption, and then I would go. I preached it in our church, and then I would go and speak to church leaders, and just ultimately ask them, "Can I speak at your church? Can I speak this message at your church?" Some would say yes, others I wouldn't hear from, which was okay. And then the job came up for Home for Good, and I thought, well, I'm already doing some of this, and it was my dream. It's where my heart beats, and that's how I came into Home for Good. The Wales lead job came up. They'd never had somebody in Wales before, and I thought, well, I'll chuck my hat into the ring, and I got the job.
I think you're probably quite a good champion of even the very notion of fostering. Just spending a little bit of time talking to you. I've just written this down. You mentioned a book. What was the book that you talked about?
Home for Good. It was actually called Home for Good by Krish Kandaya.
Chris, okay. I just for me and everybody else, how do you spell that surname? Do you know? Yeah.
Kandiah. And his first name is Krish, Krish.
Thank you. Because I know I won't be able to find it. And if I can't, maybe others wouldn't either. So he actually wrote a book, Home for Good.
Yeah, he wrote that back in about 2013.
Okay. It's just good if it's, I like books. Books are impactful. They're really good. Okay. So we've got some of your journey now from your earlier years backpacking, meeting people on the street. I tell you, the thing that keeps on striking me is I read this just yesterday, and it's about the idea of hospitality. I'm sure it was in Jeff Lucas's Daily Notes, but he was talking about hospitality in Israel is not what we think of. We think of hospitality, especially in maybe not so much northern, but southern England. It's a cup of tea and then the door's over there when you're leaving. Northern England, probably a bit better. How many cups of tea would you like? Stay until you want to go. But hospitality in Israel, he was making this point, is you assume the responsibility of not just giving them a cup of tea, but food and a bed, and by the way, protecting them from anybody who might come and physically try and harm you or your home. So this idea of hospitality, we've kind of lost some of the richness in translation of what it means. But I'm thinking about fostering, thinking that's just actual biblical hospitality. It's assuming the role of provision of food, somewhere to sleep, some drink, and protection from physical harm. And that essentially, that real version of what hospitality is, that's sort of underpinning something of what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And we'll talk about hospitality within Home for Good, because there's a theologian called what's his name? I should 2 weeks annual leave does strange things to you. Anyway, there's a theologian Tim Davies, who works closely with Home for Good. And I went on his course a few years back, which was about vulnerable children. And one of the things that he was looking for was, where does it talk about fostering within the Bible? And in many ways, you don't find fostering. Even the adoption language that Paul uses in his letters, the adoption there looked different to the adoption that we have today. But one of the things that Tim would have gone to, and Krish Kandai had done a TED talk on this, is all about hospitality, because when you think of, my mind went immediately to Abraham when you said this. Abraham, and he had his visitors, and when Sarah laughed because she'll have a baby next year, and all of that. Abraham had gone, he killed the calf, and he had these people there, and they, for them to stay the night. Our home is your home. And very much so, we see the whole hospitality thing. I think you're right. The church does seem to have watered this down into, it's a cup of tea or some food. And by the way, we go to bed at 10:30. Not everybody's like that, but it does seem like that. And one of the things that I've thought more and more is, well, fostering and adoption is all about this hospitality. Swing wide your doors, invite people to come and live with you, and which isn't always easy. But God often doesn't ask us to do what is easy. He asks us to do some of the more difficult things which are on his heart. And so, yeah, I think you've got hospitality, from what I understand of it. You've hit the nail on the head.
Not me. I'm just quoting somebody better than me in theology, Jeff Lucas. But it's that idea of hospitality which I think we've lost, because I mean, I've lived in different parts of the UK. I mean, just that in itself, you go further south, and generally, people don't ask you for a second cup of tea. When you go to the north, you get the second cup of tea whether you want it or not. And it's that point of we're showing hospitality by our actions. And one of the things I loved is I grew up basically being told, when you go into a house, help yourself. So I would. And this is a story, probably not shared this before on air. So first time I'm meeting my wife's family, and help yourself, make yourself at home. So I did, and I got myself a cup of tea, made everyone else a cup of tea, got some food going for people, and they were appalled. And Joe said, when they say make yourself at home, they don't mean that. It means something different. And I think that's where there is this sort of interesting meeting of what we say and what we mean. Whereas when we say to people, make yourself at home, I'm sort of upset if they're not helping themselves to tea and food, because when I say it, I actually mean, here's the cupboard, go for it. And that's kind of my heart, because I know both sides of that. And I know the one that I prefer, which is here's the cupboards, go for it.
Yeah.
Right, Home for Good. So just give us some statistics. What's the scale of the problem of, how many children are there who are in need of somebody, a family with a spare room, who can actually offer them the very thing that they would have desired as a child? How many children are there in the foster care system at the moment?
Well, this year we expect about 38,000 children to come into the care system.
Wow.
So let me break that down. One every 15 minutes. It's probably closer to 14 minutes now, but 15 minutes is easier to, more of a round number. That's 104-ish a day. Now when I'm speaking, I've started to give people a visual of that and saying, imagine parked in your church car park or out on the road are two 52-seater buses. They will be full by the end of today. The first person got on at midnight. The last person will get on at midnight tonight. And that's two 52-seater buses. Let me talk a little bit about Wales. I know the figures in Wales better. The latest figures are that there are about 7,200 children who are looked after away from home within the care system. Most of those are fostered. there are at any one time there are around about 140 children awaiting adoption in Wales. So they are some of the figures, and one of the other figures, and I know this best in Wales, is that we do some of the figures that are taken are per 10,000 of population. So Wales's figure is 116 per 10,000. In a place called Torfaen, which is a local authority in Wales, their particular figure was over 200. So that was the highest in Wales. So the need is great. It's huge.
I had a conversation. I don't even remember what the topic was with somebody else in an interview, and we were talking about the scale of the problem. I don't remember what the problem was, but I remember coming up with this in picture in my head of someone chucking starfish back into the sea. Maybe you've heard the story, but it really feels very pertinent to this because you look at the scale of the problem. Was it 38,000 are going to enter these are children, these are people are going to be entering the system, and they need families and they need homes. And you can look at that and think, I can't do anything. What can I do? 38,000 people. It's too big a problem. But the story of the starfish was this guy walking along, chucking starfish back in the sea after a bad storm. Someone comes along and says, what's the point? You're never going to save them all. And the guy chucking the starfish back said, yes, but I've just saved this one. And I think that is really helpful when we look at anything that feels of a magnitude greater than we can possibly even kind of, think through. We can still do something. And actually, it's just as important, if not more so, to do something because we can't, compute the scale of the problem. And I'm, hearing to what all the stuff you're saying, 38,000 children this year are entering fostering and entering the care system in the UK. These are people. These are real human beings that need homes. How can people, I suppose, get their heads around? I mean, I think yours is probably my classic sort of mental thought of, okay, love, but this is your problem. It's almost that kind of yep, I'm right behind you. You go for it. But how do we help people to get into that place to start with and then actually to be fully engaged? I mean, what are some of the obstacles that perhaps you can just demolish that people might have? Well, I can't do that.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting factors is I'm pretty sure that within the UK at the moment, there are about 104,000 children within the care system. I'm pretty sure that it's either 104,000 or within 130 odd thousand. But I think one of the things that we think of at Home for Good is that this is a solvable problem. Because you think of how many churches there are within the UK. Now, at some estimates, there are about 50,000 churches. Now, if you said that one couple or one person in each church was to foster or adopt one child, then that's 50,000 children. And the church then wrap around and support that person, that family. But if you think of it that way, if it is 104,000, then all of a sudden you've gone down to 54,000 within the care system. Now, if another family from each of those churches was to step forward, then I hesitate to use the word cure, but you have, in a sense, solved the immediate problem. So on those terms, it is a solvable problem, but it just needs people to then step forward to consider opening their doors. So that is my one. I guess that's my one big. You used the word demolition I think you used the word demolition of the argument. Now that's simplistic, but that is a fact that's out there. That if one or two people within the church, each church was to foster or adopt, you could resolve the whole issue.
Yeah. Basically, yeah, I think often we don't try anything because we think, well, there's all these 100 issues why I can't do it, so I won't even consider it. And actually, most of the issues that we think exist don't. It's just our own perception of what might be. And the realities of some of the problems that will be there. And there, like you said, there will be challenges. Of course, there are.
Mm.
Most of those challenges, they're not actually ones we thought of. We've got all these issues. And if we can get rid of those issues that just aren't, they're not real, all of a sudden now we're a step closer to doing something. And like you say, if every church does something, we can't solve everything. But if every church did one thing and every church supported one family, supporting one child twice, that's the issue of all these little people, young people, children needing homes solved, and it is solvable.
Yeah. We would say it's solvable because the numbers sort of stack up, but we don't get away from the fact that these are big numbers. But another way, and here's another thing, is that Home for Good have just merged with Safe Families. So we merged officially on the 1st of September. Now, one of the things that Safe Families does is I like to use the waterfall, the river analogy, so that you've got children. You imagine, children floating down the river, and then it comes a waterfall and they go over the waterfall. At the bottom of the waterfall, I guess you could say, is Home for Good, is the care system, the adoption agencies and all the rest of it. Upstream is Safe Families, who take on volunteers generally from local churches, but they're not bound to churches. And they want to offer support to families who are struggling. So some of the children could potentially be on the at-risk register. But what Safe Families have found is that if we go in and get a good volunteer working with the family, becoming friends with the family, often those children can disappear from the at-risk register, and you've then stopped another child coming into the care system. But you've done more than that because you've strengthened the family as well. And so another option is become a Safe Families volunteer. That's another option as well. But we've joined together because we feel that our mission is very, very similar, and we can sort of expand our offer to churches. So it might be that somebody, I can't do that, I can't foster or adopt, but hey, I could volunteer over here, and have a huge effect for a family and a child.
Neil, thank you. I'm learning loads here, and I'm really, really passionate about families. I've been a children's minister in church. I'm really passionate about how can we support families, and so often we look at problems from the wrong perspective. I don't know why this comes to mind, but one of the things that I had so many times was, how do I get my children to come to church? They've got to come to church. And I used to say to them, look, church is not the savior here. Jesus is the savior. Church is great, but church isn't everything. But the thing that I so frequently found with these parents are saying, well, if we can force our children to church, the problem's solved. And my answer was so frequently the same. And I would say to them, look, stop trying to get your child to church, introduce your child to Jesus. And then you won't be bringing your children to church. They'll be dragging you every morning. Because we so often look at the problem from the wrong angle, from an adult perspective, and it's kind of backwards. We're trying to solve a problem that isn't. And actually, we need to look at it differently. And I love how for Good are looking at this from a very different perspective of, look, this we can help you with this. This is important. This matters. And I just love that approach. And it's making me, I don't know, quite passionate about what you guys are doing. I love all my guests. Every so often I just think, come on, church, you can do this. This is actually basically quite easy for you to do. You could do this. There's a challenge for you listening and watching. If you're a church leader, find a family in church that can foster. Get them behind them, support them, because it's scary, isn't it? I mean, you've been a dad. It's scary when you got your first child in your hands and you're thinking, I'm responsible for this little person. But church leaders, you can do something. You really can. Support a family who might be scared to try, but with some support, it gets easier, doesn't it? My little rant for the morning. Neil, where can people find out more about Home for Good and how they can access your help?
Yeah, so we've got a website. Mind you, because everything is merged over, I'm not sure what that looks like now. But it's generally homeforgood.org.uk. And I think that's still running, but we are merging with Safe Families as well. Just Google us if you can't find it there. That's probably the best place to find us. If you wanted to talk to me, I lead the work in Wales, but it's Neil, Neil Davies, IES, at homeforgood.org.uk. And wherever you are in the country, I can forward your email on to whichever person covers your part of the country then. So, but if you're in Wales, come and talk to me. I'd love to meet them.
Neil, thank you from Home for Good. And if you want to know more about Neil, the work they're doing with Safer Families and also Home for Good, go to the website homeforgood.org.uk. Neil, thank you.
Thank you.
Rated 5 stars by Sorted Magazine's film critic, Pure 247 takes you behind the scenes of the birth of a global Christian radio station. Andy B will have you laughing and crying as you discover what it takes to create ministry that matters in this inspiring tale of perseverance, honesty, and vulnerability. Buckle up and get ready for a story that's uplifting as it is entertaining. Behind the microphone, they face bankruptcy, eviction, and 2 life-changing surgeries. Can they make it? Will they make it? Get your copy of this life-changing book today. Pure 247 is available now on Amazon. Andy B is best described as a man after God's own heart, who insists that God's vision and resourcing trump all handicaps.